Welcome back. This is the Now Morning Show. Lisa Wickham alongside Carrie Roberts all the way up until 8 o'clock this morning, Eastern Standard Time. We're here in Trinidad and Tobago. So greetings to you wherever you are in the world looking at us right now. We're so happy that you are here with us. September 6th to the 12th is dedicated to suicide prevention awareness, with September 10th being Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. As we continue to weigh in on issues around mental health, we shed light on depression. And joining us today is consultant psychiatrist Dr. Ian Hypolite. Good morning, Dr. Hypolite.
Hi, good morning, Lisa.
Dr. Hypolite, can you explain the difference between major depression and milder forms of depression?
The difference really is in terms of intensity. Depression is diagnosed. Once we diagnose depression, we assume that there are certain what we call signs and symptoms that accompany, and all psychiatrists around the world can attest to a classification system to diagnose depression. Depression, however, is not depression. It's not depression. In other words, many people experience more severe forms of depression than others. Some people experience deep, really, really acute onset forms of depression that leave them very, very much at risk to suicide. And of course, we are talking about suicide prevention leave.
Yes.
In other people, depression can be a chronic, episodic phenomenon. In other words, over time, people simply do not feel well, they feel sad, they lose interest, but somehow they manage to function and to get things done. They're not firing on all cylinders, but they're getting things done. But the bottom line is that they're functioning way below their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
In some instances, even though the intensity of the depression is generally less, they may encounter bouts or periods of time where they have uh, deeper phases of depression that can lead to suicide as well.
Yes. And some people have said that depression is hereditary.
I'm
Is
not
dep-
hearing you, Lisa, unfortunately.
are you are you
Yes,
hearing me now?
no, yes, perfectly, yes. Go ahead.
Is depression hereditary, and what are some of the triggers?
Yeah, depression is not entirely hereditary. We do recognize that there is a significant contribution of genetics to depression. So we can definitely say that um, genetics contributes towards depression, but it is not entirely depression. People can become depressed by virtue of external factors, life stressors, etc. But we do recognize that there is a significant genetic component to depression.
Dr. Hippolyte, is it possible for persons to be living with depression for many years, to come out of it and live a fulfilling life? Hello?
It is distinctly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Depression is not a permanent life or death sentence, however you want to construe it. Um, uh, we like to consider that depression is eminently treatable. And we adopt a particular approach to treating depression that takes into consideration the entire individual. So the biology of the individual, whether in fact we need to use medications to alter the biological construct of the individual, psychotherapy, and social support.
Mm-hmm.
But we do recognize that depression can be treated and that people who suffer from depression can seek treatment so that they can live full lives.
Mm-hmm. And some people are wary of the medication approach, thinking that they may have to be on it for the rest of their lives. Talk to us about the process of combining therapy and medication. Is it that you can do medication for a period and then move on? What's the process like?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question because lots of people have misconceptions about the use of medications. In the first instance, a lot of people think that uh, if they have to use medication, they can become hooked on medication, and that's entirely untrue. There is no antidepressant that is addictive. None, absolutely none. The other thing is that the decision as to how long one is going to use medication is entirely dependent on the particular case. We recognize that, in fact, when we have to treat depression, there's a particular time frame that we use as specialists to alleviate symptoms, but it may be that people may have either by virtue of their genetic predisposition or ongoing stressors that they may have the need to continue medication for prolonged periods. We do know as well that a combination of medication and psychotherapy works far better, is way more efficient or efficacious than using either modality on its own. In other words, combining the two modalities usually elicits a much better clinical response.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, generally, what we do is that we combine. But I'm stressing that the decision as to how long people continue medication is dependent on individual factors. Not everyone who is started on an antidepressant has to continue to take antidepressants for life.
Dr. Hypolite, before I let you go, so, some people might be watching, going through whatever it is that they're going through through themselves or with family members or friends. What's the approach really? What's the trigger? What's the tipping point to get persons to make that shift to say, I need help, or I need medication, I need counseling? Any tips?
Yes, it's important that individuals get in touch with themselves, and of course that people who are around other people, family members, friends, if you are to be described as such, you should be attuned to the people around you and to notice what is going on. When you start to see major changes in behavior, when people start to withdraw, when people start to complain, become irritable, when people start to express negative thoughts, that is cause for concern. Um, each individual, as I said, however, must also take some form of responsibility in terms of trying to identify what is quote unquote normal with them or not. In many cases, people don't know that they're experiencing depression because they quite simply either have no experience with it or are simply not in touch with themselves enough to recognize that something is going wrong. And of course, it is highly desirable that if you feel that way, you really ought to seek help. Now, seeking help may not necessarily always be rushing to a doctor. Tell a family member, tell a friend. In many instances, and as we talk about depression, people can have depressed mood without having a major depression. You can be depressed for many, many reasons or all sorts of life
Well,
circumstances.
even now with COVID-19, that brings in another factor into the equation. Yeah.
Yes, in other words, COVID-19 is now what we would want to call a chronic stressor, and there's no end in sight. That has introduced its own complications. But the fact is that you could have lost a football game. You could have been a supporter of a team that lost a football game and go into a dull mood, or a relationship may have ended and you go into a funk that may not necessarily last.
Right.
That may require just maybe an opportunity to talk about it, to ventilate. That may work. But of course, as you're hinting, the tipping point is when the mood remains constantly low. Yeah, you're not
Yeah.
coming out of it. And more importantly, when it begins to impair your functioning, that's when you should seek professional help.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading actually, and I thought, wow, binge watching of television. I don't know if you've come across any of this research. Is could be one of the signs, that you may want to think about your situation. But I was juxtaposing that against the current situation where people are indoors, and what else is there to do, right? So how do you determine?
But that's true. Well,
Yeah.
if the binge watching of the television implies that you've lost interest in other things that you would normally be interested in, then that in fact may be a sign.
Yeah.
So binge watching of television in and of itself may not necessarily be an issue. It has to be in the context of what about the other things that help you to get through this life, or the other things that you're accustomed to doing? And
Yeah.
of course, loss of interest or loss of pleasure is one of the critical factors that we identify in terms of diagnosing depression.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Hypolite, we can continue talking for a bit, but I want to thank you so much for joining us just to shed some light. I think mental health and mental health issues is so important, and the fact that we are commemorating Suicide Awareness Month and Suicide Awareness Week this week. We thought we'd invite you to weigh in, but I feel like I need to have you back a little later on because it's so many people out there would be happy to have some word of comfort and advice just to make that step. Yeah,
I appreciate that. And I want to endorse that by saying that we know that depression is, in fact, the World Health Organization recognizes that depression is the major source of disability throughout the world. And with COVID-19, at this point in time, you can well imagine that that is even more so. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, the upside, let's leave people on an upside, is that you can recover and live a fulfilling life. Yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ian Hypolite, consultant psychiatrist there. And we continue on the Now Morning Show. Good morning to you. We don't want to leave you in a depressed mood. We want to lift you up this morning and put you in a great mood for the rest of the day, the rest of the weekend, actually. It's Friday. We're back after this.